Undercover boss buys a sandwich, freezes. When waitress confesses she relies on customer leftovers, he walked into the very place he built, but this time as a stranger. It was a gloomy midweek morning. Faint sunlight filtered through the dusty glass of Carter's Diner location number 1, the foundation of what would become a 38-location empire spanning 3 states. But today, outside that glass, stood a man no one recognized. Michael Carter pulled his cap low, hands stuffed deep into the pockets of a faded flannel jacket. His unshaven face made him look like a laborer who'd wandered into a diner built for office crowds. He had no reservation, no announcement, and that was intentional. In the role of Mike, the drifter, he pushed the door open. The doorbell gave a familiar ding, a sound he had once installed himself. But this time, no one looked up. No one greeted him. Not because they were busy, but because no one saw it as necessary anymore. Michael chose a table by the window. From this spot, he could see the entire front counter, the open kitchen, and even the dishwashing station tucked behind a clear vinyl curtain. The staff moved with just enough speed, not rushed, not slow. But what unsettled him were their eyes. No focus, no connection. Everyone operated on their own rhythm, just doing the bare minimum to get through their shift. But at the back, a corner no one paid much attention to, he saw something different. An older man with salt and pepper hair was carefully drying trays that had just come out of the wash. No one had asked for that level of detail. His movements were slow, but steady and deliberate. Not a word of complaint, not a single glance seeking recognition. The name on the small tag pinned to his shirt, Henry. Michael squinted, studying him. There was something about Henry that held his gaze longer than expected. Not the age, not the modest appearance, but the way he kept doing things right, even as everyone else had settled for just enough. The first cup of coffee was placed on Michael's table with little attention. The server didn't ask his name, didn't smile. But Michael didn't react, because he wasn't here for breakfast. He was here to observe, to find out what had drifted so far from the values he once stamped with the name Carter's. And if that meant starting the inspection from the lowest point in the system, then he would begin in the quietest place, the dish station, where a man named Henry was silently preserving the standards the rest of the diner seemed to have forgotten. Some things don't show up in reports. They're revealed only when no one thinks anyone is watching. Michael was stirring his coffee, now cooling, when he heard a faint burst of laughter coming from the cashier station. Not too loud, but just enough to break the flow of thoughts forming in his mind. Did you see that girl? Came in here and couldn't even pay for her sandwich. The woman's voice high-pitched, deliberately dropping emphasis on the last word. She sounded like someone used to passing judgment. Yeah, and guess who had to step in with his wallet again? Henry. Honestly, he's like the diner's walking charity fund. The man's voice lazy, but marked with a smirk tucked into his final syllables. Both of them burst out laughing, as if they just crafted an inside joke too clever for the rest of the world. Michael didn't turn his head. He simply leaned lower, pretending to look for a napkin under the table, but his eyes tilted just enough to scan the reflection in the drink machine's glass panel nearby. Troy, tall, clean fade haircut, shirt tucked impeccably, was behind the register, holding the POS device, but not really looking at the screen. Megan's slender build, rose gold glasses, stood beside him, tapping her nails on the counter like she was waiting for the next customer to continue her silent performance. Michael's fingers tightened slightly around his coffee spoon. Not because they were mocking a customer who couldn't pay, but because of how natural, how laughable, how permissible they believed that was. What made it worse? The name they used as a punchline, Henry, was the very man Michael had just observed working harder, quieter, and more diligently than the entire team combined. The man who, instead of receiving respect, was being ridiculed mid-shift, in plain view of customers. Michael lifted his cup to his lips, masking the change in his expression. But what had been a comforting warmth on his tongue now turned to a chill that ran down his spine. This wasn't about one struggling customer, or one ill-timed joke. This was the first clear sign that the culture here had drifted, and not by accident. It had drifted systemically. No one corrected Troy or Megan. No warning glances from coworkers. No discomfort. Nothing seemed out of place to them. And it was the absence of any reaction that froze Michael to his core. If Henry the dishwasher is a punchline now, what else has been twisted here that I haven't seen yet? That question, it wouldn't show up in any branch report. But from that moment forward, it became the center of the investigation Michael knew he had to lead, because he was no longer just a customer. He was the only one with the power and the responsibility to uncover everything down to the root. Not everything that goes missing is lost. Some things are taken deliberately. Since that morning when he overheard the conversation, Michael hadn't stepped out of his role as the unfamiliar older customer. But inside, another script was quietly being written, not to taste something new, but to expose something old that had been too well hidden. Over the course of a week, he returned to the diner 3 times, each time sitting in a different spot, once near the cashier counter, once by the entrance, and the third time near the kitchen, where he could watch the journey of food trays, receipts, and even the employees' eye movements. Each time he did one thing, kept track of cash transactions, comparing them to the menu screen and printed receipt times. No need for advanced auditing software, just a pen, a notebook, and patience, and he spotted mismatched figures. Several small cash transactions, usually under $15, never showed up in the end-of-day reports, but they always matched the shifts when Troy and Megan were working. A recurring pattern emerged. Customers paid in cash, didn't ask for receipts. Troy put the money in the drawer, but minutes later, that receipt was never logged into the system. Those missing amounts were reported as technical errors or customers left without paying. Worse, whose name showed up the most in those loss reports? Henry. Henry was washing trays. The cash drawer wasn't locked. Customer came back saying they were short, changed. Maybe Henry handled it wrong. No direct accusations. Just coincidentally placed notes, but full of intent and repeated by design. Michael clenched the notebook in his pocket. He'd seen plenty of manipulation in the FB industry, but blaming the weakest staff member that always made him angrier than the fraud itself. So, he decided to stage a situation to observe the real reaction from those who thought they were above the rules. On a Tuesday morning, a young woman walked into the diner with her small child. Slightly messy hair, a worn-out coat, anxious eyes, no acting. She was a real single mother, a volunteer in a social support program Michael had once funded. She ordered a sandwich and a milk for her child. At the counter, she opened her wallet and counted slowly and was exactly $2 short. "Can I come back and pay the rest later? My son needs the milk now," she asked, her voice so soft it could easily be ignored. Megan looked up, the eyes behind her rose gold glasses unmoved. "This place isn't a charity. If you don't have the money, don't order." Michael sat at table number 5. From there, he was recording the entire conversation using a device hidden in his shirt pocket, directly connected to Mara, the head of internal audit, waiting at the corporate office. The scene didn't stop there. Troy stepped out from the back, leaned in toward Megan, and whispered low enough that only the customer and Michael could hear, "Let Henry deal with this one." Another excuse to suggest replacing him. And Sime, that line like a pair of scissors cutting through the last remaining disguise. Michael looked at Henry, who was just walking out from the kitchen with a bus tray, eyes not meeting anyone, silently glancing at the young mother before heading back to his locker. Henry didn't say a word. He simply left 2 $1 bills on the counter and nodded at the child. Not the first time, and it wouldn't be the last if Michael didn't act. In that moment, Michael knew the audit was complete. Now came the confrontation. But he didn't get up immediately. He stayed seated still, like an anonymous silhouette in the morning crowd, though his mind was spinning like the gears of the very system he once believed to be sound. In the hidden earpiece under his shirt collar, Mara's voice came through steadily. "Confirmed. Audio recording complete. Pause counter camera matches the dialogue. We have both video and audio evidence. Want to escalate the investigation?" Michael didn't respond. He needed one more puzzle piece. One final detail, not to press charges, but to understand just how deep the cultural rot had spread at this location. Moments later, as Henry went back to the kitchen, Michael stood and casually walked toward the drink station close to the register, but far enough not to draw attention. He pretended to grab a straw, but in reality, he was replaying footage from a mini camera hidden in his shirt button, just as he expected. After Henry walked away, Troy reached into the drawer, took out the same $2, and pocketed it. Not to help Henry, not to cover the store's loss, but to pretend to be a hero, then quietly take the money back. A small staged act of kindness for profit, repeated 10 times, and it becomes hundreds of dollars vanishing without a trace, especially when the one implicated is someone who'd never dare speak up. Michael returned to his table and jotted a few lines into his notebook. But not for the audit report. Henry isn't just being manipulated. He's been turned into a shadow, a backdrop for others to paint their false virtue upon. That afternoon, after the lunch rush, Michael discreetly approached a young employee named Kiera, a new intern, who was often assigned to work near Henry. "Have you ever seen Henry eat lunch during his shift?" Michael asked casually, still playing the role of a regular, curious customer. Kiera blinked, then softly replied, "No, sir. I've seen him asked to take home leftover food from customers. One time I asked him about it, and he joked, Saving my tips for medicine, so leftover food is kind to my stomach too. Michael nodded slightly, said nothing more. But inside, every puzzle piece had locked into place. This wasn't just about fraud or post-system manipulation. It was about a culture that had come to accept, even expect that those truly kind and honest would be seen as weak and exploited without question. And if Henry continued quietly pulling money from his own pocket for others while eating leftover sandwiches himself, then Michael knew it wasn't just Henry who needed protecting. The entire system needed rebirth from the very place that once was its heart. The investigation didn't end with a spreadsheet. It ended with a half-eaten sandwich, meant for the man who had upheld integrity in a restaurant, slowly losing its soul. Some days don't need anger. Just the truth made visible, standing in the middle of the room like a mirror. 9:11 a.m. peak hour at Carter's Diner No. 1, once the pride of the whole chain. The kitchen sizzled, orders shouted, doors swung open. At the register, Troy briskly processed a $12 cash order. Megan stood beside him, makeup just right, nodding with a pre-programmed smile. And then, the door opened. Michael walked in. No cap, no worn flannel, just a light gray suit, and eyes that no longer observed, because he had seen enough. No one recognized him right away. But Henry, who was wiping a table near the door, was the first to freeze. His hand tightened around the cloth, eyes widened briefly, then he quickly bowed his head, not out of fear, but as a reflex from a respect that hadn't yet faded. Despite being disregarded so many times, Michael walked straight to the center of the counter, where Megan was about to greet the next customer. He extended his hand firm, but not loud, and said, "That screen, connect this device to it." Megan looked confused. Troy froze. A few curious customers turned to watch. Mara, head of internal audit, entered from behind, tablet in hand. She said nothing, just gave a small nod. A moment later, the pause screen behind the counter lit up and began playing the first video. No editing, no narration, just raw sound, real images. Recorded right there at that very counter where Troy quietly told Megan, "Let Henry handle this one. That'll be another reason to push for his replacement." Next came the clip of Megan refusing the single mother. "Don't order if you can't pay. This isn't a charity." And then the final clip with no dialogue, just Henry, placing two $1 bills on the counter, then turning away. His shoulders still upright, but his silhouette visibly thinner. The whole diner went silent. Megan trembled slightly. Troy froze, rigid. A young staff member from the kitchen stepped forward, as if to say something, then held back. Michael turned to face everyone. He didn't raise his voice, but his tone firm, each word striking like a gavel on granite. "I am Michael Carter, founder of this place, and today I didn't come back to eat a sandwich. I came back to see what Carter's Diner has become when no one stands up for what's right." He pointed at the screen now, showing Henry quietly clearing trash for a new trainee during the peak lunch rush. "I didn't show this video to shame anyone. I played it to remind you. I built this place so that staff would be treated with as much respect as customers. But here kindness has been turned into a punchline, and I won't let that continue." He turned again, looked directly at Megan, then at Troy. "You two from this moment on are no longer employees of Carter's, and not because of cash fraud, but because you turned a human being, Henry, into a scapegoat for your convenience and hypocrisy." A spoon clattered onto the floor. No one picked it up. Michael looked at Henry. For the first time, not in the shadows of the dishwashing corner, but in the center of the diner, under the lights and in full view of dozens of witnesses. "Thank you," he said. No embellishment, just 3 words, but heavy like a bell toll, restoring order to the entire system. And in that moment, the small diner, once the flagship, once the foundation, once again became the place where Michael Carter chose to redraw the line between right and wrong. Evidence didn't need to be debated. It just needed to be shown at the right time. Megan opened her mouth to defend herself, but no words came out. No more clever excuses. No one left to stand beside her. Troy took half a step back, eyes fixed on the floor, where his polished black shoes now looked as shameless as the behavior that had just been exposed. An older employee in the kitchen, Roy, set his paring knife down on the cutting board and slowly stepped out of the prep area, removing his gloves. He looked at Michael, then at Henry. "I saw it for months, but I was scared of losing my job. Now, thank you, because today, everyone saw it." That voice seemed to release an invisible knot in the crowded room. A young server, likely new, spoke up, visibly shaken. "I used to think staying quiet meant being safe, but I let it all happen." Michael looked at them without reproach. He simply nodded and spoke slowly. "No one is fired for having once been silent. but some will be removed if they continue to stand by while the truth is twisted. He pulled an envelope from his vest pocket and set it on the counter. Inside was the list of new appointees to the core staff program, an initiative he redesigned just the night before, specifically for those who had the courage to speak up for what's right. Henry remained still, his hand clutching the cleaning cloth as if it were a familiar anchor. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. He wasn't used to being thanked, but he understood. This morning would mark a turning point. Michael turned and walked toward the door. Before pushing the door open, he turned back, letting his gaze sweep across the space one last time. If Carter's Diner was once the birthplace of my dream, then from today on, it will return to being the place where good people are seen. You don't need to shout to be heard. Just hold on to what's right and never bow your head to what's wrong. All lunch. When the door closed behind him, the diner hadn't quite returned to its usual rhythm. But something had shifted. Not because of a video, not because of a CEO, but because the truth finally had stood in the middle of the room, and no one dared to look away. Some things don't need to be declared. They just need to be put back in their rightful place, and they will echo loudly enough. 3 days after that morning of confrontation, Henry was invited to the regional office. No summons, no disciplinary sheet, just a handwritten note, personally sent by Michael through the new manager. We'd like to hear you speak for the first time, not to defend yourself. There, Henry didn't say much. He just shared simple things. How he once quietly tucked leftover sandwiches into paper bags for interns working late. How he recorded every unpaid overtime hour without ever asking for anything. And why he didn't leave. Because I kept thinking, maybe someone would come back and realize this place needs fixing, not erasing. Michael listened. No interruptions. No note-taking. The next day, the entire Carter's Diner system received a system-wide announcement. All branches would be upgraded with real-time surveillance camera systems connected directly to HQ. POS would be updated to transparently display activity by individual staff, preventing manipulation. An official internal support fund would be established to aid struggling employees, with nominations coming directly from fellow staff. On that notice, under the field marked "Initiated by," one name was printed in bold: Henry Dawson, kitchen assistant, Branche 1. 1 week later, when the diner had returned to its regular pace, Henry was just finishing his morning shift when he found a small envelope placed beneath the napkin holder at the back table, the very one where Michael had quietly sat many mornings, unnoticed. Inside was a neatly folded $50 bill and a handwritten note in bold, tidy handwriting, much like the person who wrote it. "Thank you for holding on to your integrity, even when no one stood up for you. You weren't behind this system, but you're the one who kept it from falling apart. M.C." Henry folded the note. This time, he didn't put it in his shirt pocket. He placed it inside the toolbox, right next to his kitchen cloth, like a personal emblem. Not for display, but as a reminder. Even the quietest places have value if the person holding them up doesn't walk away. Henry didn't tell anyone about the envelope. He simply washed his hands, dried them, and returned to the kitchen station as usual, as if nothing special had just happened. But in the way he moved that day, there was something subtly different. His shoulders no longer slumped quite the same way. In the days that followed, at Carter's Diner, branch number 1, something else began happening quietly. Employees started acknowledging each other, not with grand words, but with concrete gestures. A shift supervisor proactively asking, "Have you been assigned your shifts fairly?" A new intern wiping oil stains off the floor, because they saw Henry do it without ever being asked. One late afternoon after the lunch rush had passed, Roy, the veteran chef, walked past the dishwashing station, then paused and looked at Henry. "All those months watching you rinse trays, I just figured you were one of those guys who doesn't get tired. But now I get it, you saw everything that was going wrong, and you still chose to stay. I'll remember that next time I'm tempted to look the other way." Henry smiled and nodded, said nothing, as usual. But for the first time, someone had begun to hear his silence. At other branches, the internal policy changes began sparking a chain reaction. At branch number 12, an employee once labeled clumsy was nominated for emergency support from the support fund. The nominator? A colleague she once quietly helped carry food when his hand was sprained. At branch number 7, after the updated POS system went live, 2 shift managers voluntarily stepped down from controlling the shift schedule to avoid conflicts of interest, an open space for others to report unfairness without fear. And at the central office, Mara, head of internal audit, sent Michael a brief report. Anonymous complaints dropped by 28% in 2 weeks. But the more important part, the number of thank you notes signed, not anonymous, nearly doubled. Michael folded the report and set it aside. He turned to the old photo on the wall, the one of him and the three original kitchen staff when he opened Carter's back in 1998. None of them still work here. But today, he knows. Carter's has just reclaimed what they once built together, not in the number of dishes sold, but in the way they treat each other behind the counter. A diner doesn't need a big signboard to become a pillar of support. It only needs one person patient enough to keep integrity alive through the days when the system forgets itself. Henry didn't become a director. He didn't get promoted. He still wipes trays, pushes the water cart, checks the wash valves every morning. But now, each of those actions is no longer just a routine repeated in silence. It has become a reminder for the entire system that kindness still exists. And this time, they no longer dare to ignore it. Kindness is not a bonus point to be retained. It is the foundation for a business to exist without losing the reason it was built in the first place. A company can survive on revenue, but it can only grow if it dares to stand with those who have no one left to stand with them.